Hi, y'all. This is Alex, and I'm back with our tool for our episode on the fall. Actually, for the episode on the fall, we have two tools. This first tool, I like to say that if I could get couples to incorporate one thing into their conflict resolution toolbox, it would be this tool, and it is pausing for emotional regulation. Now there's a whole backstory to this tool, and I'm going to try to make this understandable. I just want to say from the outset that we have a worksheet that goes along with this tool. We actually have two worksheets. One is a diagram of the window of tolerance, and the other one is an explanation worksheet. So let's just start with what is the window of tolerance, because the window of tolerance is what's going to help us understand when we need a pause. The window of tolerance is actually a concept that was developed by Dr. Dan Siegel. And it describes this place where we feel at our optimal, where we feel like our nervous system is functioning the most effectively. It's the place where we can process emotions, manage stress, and stay connected and engaged without becoming overwhelmed. It's where we are capable of problem solving and creativity. And so within this window of tolerance is where we feel like we can handle the challenges of life. The window of tolerance, staying in the window of tolerance, does not mean that we don't feel stress. It doesn't mean that we don't have problems. It just means we feel like we're able to stay emotionally regulated as we handle what life is throwing at us. Now, for many of us, we realize that we don't stay in our window of tolerance. And that's where you hear these terms like hyperarousal or hypoarousal, going up or coming down. So let's talk about what that is. Hyperarousal is when we feel so overwhelmed by stress and our nervous system moves into a place called fight or flight. And most recently, they've added fawn. That means we feel anxiety, panic, maybe even anger. Physical symptoms might be that our heart rate speeds up, or we start to sweat, or we feel sick on our stomach, or we feel tight in our muscles. And God designed our nervous systems this way in order to protect us. We're not doing something wrong when we go into fight or flight. I always say it's not a sin to be hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused. We might do some sinning while we're in those states, but it's not a sin in and of itself to be in hyper-arousal. This is the way God designed our nervous system to be able to handle a threat. Now, so sometimes we go up in hyperarousal, and sometimes we go down in hypoarousal, and that's when we feel like we're shutting down. This is the freeze response. It's when we begin to feel numb or withdrawn. We feel overwhelmed or maybe go into complete collapse and dissociation. So again, these are responses to the nervous system feeling like it's in danger, and it's God's system to help to protect us. But what we want to make sure we understand when it comes to marriage and comes to close relationships is we do not do healthy, good, creative, or connected problem solving in relationships when we are in fight or flight or freeze. In other words, we want to make sure that when we are in conflict with our spouse, that we want to stay in our window of tolerance. We want to make sure that we are not responding like there's a dangerous situation, because we're not going to be able to access that good part of our brain, that upper brain, that prefrontal cortex, where our good language and problem solving and organizing systems are. So before I talk about the pause, let me just say that there are a lot of factors that affect our window of tolerance. What I like to say is everybody has one, but everybody has a different maybe size window of tolerance. And how narrow or wide our window of tolerance is really has to do with past trauma and stress. Stressors cause our window of tolerance to narrow. But our window of tolerance can also be expanded through therapy, through taking care of ourselves, through building relationships, all different tools that we use to increase our capacity to handle stress. What we want to recognize in marriage is that we want to begin to recognize our own personal personal, physical, emotional, or behavioral signs of when we leave our window of tolerance. What happens when I go into fight or flight? I personally notice it when I am tense in my shoulders and when my face starts to feel flushed and I feel my heartbeat accelerate. For overwhelm or collapse for me, I will begin to feel like I am distant or not involved in what's happening in the room. And so I need to recognize what's happening in my body, just like each one of us needs to know, how do I respond when my body goes into hyperarousal? How do I respond when my body goes into hypoarousal? A lot of times that means we're going to have to slow down conflict and interaction so we can notice, do a lot of good noticing of what happens in our body. We may notice that we are entering into hypoarousal when something's not even going on in the room, but it's going on in our head with the story that we're telling ourselves. So we need to be aware of the thoughts that are driving us into hyper or hypoarousal. So why do we use this tool for marriage? Because very often in marriage, we find that the longer we live with somebody, we know how to push them out of their window of tolerance and they us. They're just things that when sinners live together, that conflict arises. And so what we want to notice, and we want to decide together as a couple, decide that we will not continue to have a conflict discussion if one or both of us is out of our window of tolerance. We want to honor that that is not the time to try to knuckle down and try harder. What I like to say is our nervous system does not respond to bootstrapping. It does not respond to bullying. You are not going to try harder in order to get back into your window of tolerance. To get back in our window of tolerance when we're in fight or freeze often means that we have to find a quiet space. We need to change our location. We need to walk out of the room. We need to take a walk. The fastest way to get back in our window of tolerance when we're in hyperarousal is deep breathing, deep belly diaphragmatic breathing. We might need to find a quiet place to pray. We might need to ground back to our five senses, but we need to be able, in the midst of a difficult discussion, to ask our partner for a pause in order to be able to get back into our window of tolerance. Now, that's the first key. Here's the second key. We need to decide as a couple, number one, first key, that we're going to honor when our partner asks for a pause. And number two, if you are the one asking for the pause, I encourage you to give an indication of when you're going to come back. So it can be as simple as, hey, I need 10 minutes. Like, that rocked my world. I need a few minutes to gather myself. I'll be back in 10 minutes and let's talk about this. Or it could be, I need until after dinner. Or it could be, hey, I think we're going to have to revisit this Saturday morning when the house is quiet and we don't have the work stress that we have this week. But we want to give some indicator of when we're going to come back together, and we want to keep that promise. Keeping that promise will help us remember next time that the pause is not just a way that we're brushing something under the carpet, but that what we're really asking for is for both of us to be able to show up in a regulated space, to be able to solve conflict effectively and caringly. We want to be able to care for each other in the midst of that discussion. So I just encourage you to look at the worksheet. There's a visual diagram of the window of tolerance that just helps me. It talks about these different awareness that we need to bring to our body, but also the different ways that it shows up when we're in hyperarousal or hypoarousal. And then I encourage you to spend a week or two just noticing yourself. Just notice when throughout the day, where are you on this chart of the window of tolerance? I like to think of the window of tolerance as a scale of 1 to 10, that 4 through 7 is your sweet spot, that 1, 2, and 3 are hypoarousal, and 8, 9, and 10 are hyperarousal. And what I like to ask people to do is to spend a week or two just noticing throughout a day and a week where you are on that scale of 1 to 10. When was I in my window of tolerance? Oh, hey, last night when I had that discussion about what was going on in the neighborhood, I was in an 8. I was outside my window of tolerance. When I wake up in the morning, where do I feel? When we talk about a different topic, when I interact with my children, when I'm at my son's soccer game, where am I on the scale of 1 to 10? Just do some noticing for a week or two. And then you and your spouse come together and decide together to honor when one or the other of you asks for a pause. And remember to schedule a time to come back together and keep that time. I think that what you'll find is if you and your spouse make a commitment to trying to solve conflict only when you're within your window of tolerance, I think what you'll find is that you solve conflict much more quickly and you'll feel more connected when you're solving the conflict. So I hope this is helpful. This is kind of one of those body-soul tools that we talk about where we begin to bring awareness of what's happening in our bodies so that it helps our souls in staying more connected with one another. Again, I have a worksheet. It explains everything I just said. It also gives a few discussion questions, and I have a diagram of the window of tolerance so that you can see a visual representation of it. And I hope that helps as we encounter the fall and all the ways that it feels like it's working against our marriages.